Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Bestiary of Sigillum from Crowd D Games. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, haven't I already watched a review of Bestiary of Sigillum on this channel? First of all, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate you tuning in for this one as well, but you're not wrong. I reviewed the prototype for Bestiary of Sigillum doing the crowdfunding campaign. And to that end, this review is going to do a brief recap of that, but primarily focusing on the new things, the additional content I didn't have a chance to see while covering that game in that current form, as opposed to I've been able to go through a bunch more of the game, including new maps, the solo mode, new characters, all of that, which I'll be talking about today. To that end, just to go over a brief recap of what this game is, Bestiary of Sigillum at its core is going to be a two-player head-to-head experience. There's a solo mode, which we'll talk about as well. There's a two-player campaign mode we'll talk about as well. And there are multiplayer modes. You can play with multiple characters, more than two players. I haven't played with any of those, and I don't know if that's as much my jam based on the way the game is, based on the type of game the game is trying to be. I don't know if that's my preferred way of playing it. But the game is primarily a game in which you're going to have a giant pool of characters over here. You're going to be drafting these pool of characters, and there's a bunch of ways you can go ahead and try to eliminate characters or go through a draft. There's a bunch of things you can do, but you have a ton of cards, and each of these characters has three unique abilities. Three abilities unique to them, plus of course a health and other things to be mindful of. They have their type, what they're good at, but just a ton of characters in the game, with each side picking three of these characters, drafting back and forth, potentially having veto powers and all of that, and then going ahead and taking one of the boards. Over here we have one map over here, but we also have a bunch more maps you have access to. So you have a double-sided map there, we have a double-sided map over here, we have a double-sided map over here. Each of these giving you slight variations to the way the core gameplay plays out, and your goal is to effectively reduce your opponent's tower down to 0 health. Starting from 20 health over here, not 20, whatever number this is over here, but reducing their tower down to 0 health. And the way you do that is by controlling the various watchtowers on the board. So for example, on this map over here, you have your core bases over here, and you have these 2 watchtowers, which are going to launch attacks on your opponent's tower if you have control of those at the end of your turn. That's the core idea. You're going to go ahead, you're going to activate your characters, you're going to utilize their abilities. The abilities that you utilize will go into various cooldown slots. This will rotate every round, which means eventually it's going to come back down to 1, and you'll get the ability back where you can reactivate it. Well, that's actually the primary ability. Primary abilities doesn't really have a cooldown over there. These are going to be every turn you can either move or use this attack ability, and then you have other abilities you're going to utilize, and of course the health you're being mindful of as you try to gain control of towers, take down your opponents, and characters don't really die so much as resetting, therefore they're out of commission for a bit while they try to get back to the towers to try to stop you, and the goal is to tactically outmaneuver your opponent using those characters. Brief recap of my opinions there, which have not changed significantly since continuing to play this, but overall, I find Bestiary of Sigillum to be a very fun tactical head-to-head experience game, one that I both very much enjoy the actual aspect of having your characters, of trying to outpace and outplay your opponent in the game. I really like the core concept of the game, with caveats that are very noteworthy, especially when I'm choosing whether this is a game that is or isn't for me. And those caveats primarily come down to the fact that as much as I appreciate the sheer variety of characters that you have access to, as much as I think that's an amazing thing, it also means that when I'm playing against you across the table, I have to try to figure out what your abilities are. One of the things I kind of was hoping to see, but we didn't, is like hopefully seeing some sort of deck of cards where I can go ahead and say, oh, you're playing as Architectus over here, and therefore I can take Architectus Player Aid and see the things that Architectus can do without having trying to constantly ask you questions or look at your player powers. And so I find that the game works really well, but it does mean it's hard to keep track of the abilities in play unless you're playing this a lot. Speaking of which, like many two-player head-to-head games in this vein, I find this is a game that will reward players who play it a lot and will not be as great for the player who's popping in intermittently to play against me when I've played the game 17 times and they've played it twice. And so I do find that while as much as I appreciate the game, it falls into the vein of games like BattleCon, games like, well, this, or any kind of two-player head-to-head game where learning and knowing the characters is a paramount part of how good you are at the experience. So I like it, with reservations about I think it's a game that will work primarily for people who are playing this a lot and not people who are diving into it intermittently. None of that has changed. What has changed, on the other hand, is the fact that over here, one of the biggest things for me, first of all, there are new maps. The new map variety is fun. Characters, I don't know if I had new characters or not. I certainly didn't play as all the characters when I first played the game, but I've played as more of the characters since then. And so I've seen more character variety, even though there isn't necessarily more character variety since I last played it, but I've played as more characters and had a chance to see more of those. But most specifically, the biggest thing I want to focus on today is the solo mode for the game, as well as the two-player campaign mode. So when you're going through those, the solo mode and the two-player campaign mode is just a two-player experience with some rules and adjustments and tweaks around the experience. But the solo mode in particular, there's a bunch of solo content in this game. We're going to have pieces of paper falling onto the floor over there. We're going to have your duel campaign, a full rule book over here of different scenarios you're going through over here. So you have 5, 6, 7. We have 8 different scenarios to go through in this duel campaign. I believe it's 1 on each of the maps as you go through the experience. But more specifically, we have 3 different campaigns. We have Bestiary's campaign, we have Manus's campaign, and then over here in this particular rule book as well, we have, I don't remember his name over here, I think it's Victim's campaign over here, which is a set of linked scenarios, and they are all linked. Like, they end off, each one starts with a thematic aspect of where one left off as you go through a particular challenge of scenarios that have a degree of story arc, although the story arc isn't necessarily that much of a big deal. But effectively, you have somewhere in the range of, I don't know the exact count, but around 45 solo puzzles to go through. That's what these are. They're solo puzzles. There is not an enemy AI, so to speak. Rather, there is the idea that you have a specific goal, you have a specific setup. So for example, I have this right now set up as one of these scenarios over here that you're going to encounter, and then you have a specific puzzle of, okay, great, within 2 turns, how can you accomplish your goals? And within 2 turns is a key part of it, meaning you have your turn, you can utilize all your abilities, the enemy has their turn, they can do all of their things, and then you have your turn again to accomplish them. And different ones will have different degrees of, you know, what exact structure you're working with, but this is where it gets interesting. Because overall, think of these as chess challenges. Think of these as situations where you're looking at a board and you have to kind of find the pattern of how to utilize a combination of abilities to achieve your results using a specific set of board criteria in play. Now, there's a bunch of things that are going well for that over here, for that puzzle. I have some critiques against it, but a lot of things I like about it. The biggest thing I like about it is it's challenging. I have not gone through anywhere near all 45 of them. I've gone through, you know, maybe a dozen of these challenges, and they are hard. They are hard challenges. I think my second challenge was the first one that I lost, where I was like, I don't see, like, I think I'm misunderstanding something. I think they're misunderstanding. I think they're getting it wrong. And then I flip to the back where it has a little chart of exactly how to operate over here, which we'll complain about that soon. But it's clever. It's dastardly clever over here. The way you are forced to combine abilities is really a challenge. You have the opportunity to kind of look at the board, read the board, see how your opponents react, and do what you need to do. And it is hard. It's a puzzle. It really is genuinely. I found myself, the first one was like, even the first puzzle I played was hard, but I got through it. By the time I got to my second puzzle, I lost, and then I alternated winning or losing different challenges, trying to find the pattern, because this is not an easy sequence of solo puzzles to go through. Now, there's a few things pro and con against it. The first pro, and it's worth noting, by the way, that I don't know what the retail version of the game is versus what I have over here. This, I believe, is the full Kickstarter version, and so it's possible I have stuff that won't be in a retail version of the game. Please check into that, especially if you're buying this specifically under the premise of 45 solo challenges. Just make sure you're actually getting all of that when you hunt down whatever type of copy you get of this. But the first thing in its favor is the fact that 45 is a decent number of solo challenges. This is one where I can pull this out across, I don't know, 7 or 8 separate sessions before I finally go through all of it. And it's not something I would feel the need to replay. I can't imagine I would want to replay them, but it is something that's going to give me a decent amount of game time just out of the solo challenges alone, although going to the overall idea of the game, that does, of course, put me in a harder position to play against other players who haven't had the opportunity to mentally delve into the way combinations of powers can operate and finding those patterns. So as much as I appreciate the solo challenges, it does put me at a higher skill differential than someone else walking into it, which for me isn't a big deal, because I think anyways my perception of Bestiary of Sigillum is that it's a great game that I've had a lot of fun with, but doesn't fit my general gaming style of 2-player head-to-head games because of that skill gap. But it is worth noting that if that's something that's borderline for you, that might be a problem, because it will make you better at the game. Past that, I'll say that the tricky part about the challenges, so I like the amount of content, I like the challenginess of the puzzles. I think the tricky thing to be mindful of is, first of all, I hate the text description of how to translate these puzzles. Over here are the answers to all the puzzles, and I'm not worried about spoilers over here, because the code of how to read these is so obnoxious that yes, the puzzle answers are there, but I don't love the way that, I don't love trying to read through them a puzzle out exactly how they operate. It's not the worst, but it's written in a shorthand that is not the most clear either. But I'll say that additionally to that, I had a complaint. Oh yes, there we go. Additionally to that, I think the biggest issue for me is that the solo challenges don't just require you to find out what you're good at, they also challenge you to find out what your opponents can do. Part of the aspect is whenever one of these solo challenges lasts for at least 2 turns, it means that there isn't a progressive way that you operate the enemies. The rules are, try to do your thing, and if the enemies could stop you in any way, then they do. So any combination of finding a pattern of the ways the enemies can stop you is part of the challenge, which is something to be mindful of, because effectively what you have is a situation where you might think you solved the puzzle because you didn't see the way the enemy could stop you. But that would not be the solution, meaning I don't mind trying to force my way through trying to figure out the solution to the puzzle. What if I think I solved it? What if I think I solved it and the answer is just that I'm not good enough at figuring out that the enemy actually could have stopped me? And so I'm like, I got it. I go look at the answer and I'm like, oh, turns out the enemy could have got to me as well. Meaning you are forced to be good at your own side, but you're also forced to be good at the opponent's side, which leads to an interesting situation, which is if you're not good enough to puzzle your way through your side, you also might not be good enough to puzzle your way through the opponent's side, if that makes sense. So that is a interesting aspect of the solo challenges that is worth pointing out. Think again of a chess challenge where you have to try to get checkmate, but you also have to be able to be mindful in reading through your opponent's moves as well as you try to puzzle out whether they can or can't stop you. So it's not a big deal for me, but it's worth pointing that out, that is a weakness, a flaw, whatever you want to call it, as far as how to address or play through those solo challenges. But outside of that, I really still enjoy Bestiary of Sigillum. My overall opinion still stands. I think it's a great game that is slightly harder for the way I'll personally play through the game, but I love going through the various puzzles over here, and even the dual campaign is something that I could see myself going through with a particular person in my game group who I think would be a good fit for. But overall, this is a good game with a lot of strategy, a lot of characters, a lot of variety in characters, a lot of variety in maps. There's even like an event deck to go through as well, so there's even more things being added in as well that I didn't talk about. There's a bunch of solo campaigns, there's a 2-player campaign. There's just a lot of content for an overall good game. But for me, the main reason I'm highlighting this today is because I've really been enjoying those solo puzzles, and I thought it was worth talking about a delivered game that I covered during the prototype phase because of those additional changes. In any case, then until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.